if you produce corn per hectare, you can produce more biomass, where if you produce alfalfa, you produce less biomass, right? Now, if you take all of those factors into account and do a life cycle assessment to incorporate emission from animals, from feed, from manure, and from animal management like electricity and those kind of things, right? And that's your life cycle assessment. What we found that at the whole farm scale, until the milk leaves the farm, the footprint, carbon footprint was not different between alfalfa and corn.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Feed Science Podcast, brought to you by Wisenetics. My name is Bob Odker, and I'm here today with Dr. Uddin, and he is going to help us understand some life cycles of feeds and ingredients. So, Dr. Uddin, if you'd introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bob, for the invitation, and really appreciate this. So, as you said, my name is Elias Uddin. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut right now. Where my research focuses on mainly two areas. One is, by training, I'm a dairy nutritionist. So we do a lot of dairy nutrition kind of stuff, mainly focusing on how to evaluate feed and feed additives, mainly to enhance productivity and efficiency while reducing environmental impact. Mainly, we focus on carbon footprint. So we also do quite a bit of life cycle assessment during my PhD postdoc, and as a faculty member, I have been focusing quite a bit of my research on life cycle assessment. So today I thought I would talk about life cycle assessment, which is not a new thing, it's booming. So I thought it would be useful for the audiences. In my capacity, I mainly do research, but also teach classes like sustainable animal agriculture class, as well as animal nutrition classes. So that's my life looks like.
Feed formulation software is stuck in the past. Most tools haven't evolved beyond basic least cost optimization. Additive Forge changes that. It's an AI-powered platform with nonlinear ingredient modeling for enzymes and additives, cost per gain and maximum profit optimization, and real-time collaboration like Google Docs for nutrition. Every recommendation is grounded in world-class research, built for modern nutritionists who need more than legacy desktop software can deliver. Work seamlessly with your team and optimize the way modern operations demand. Try dietforge.ai free today. Feed formulation, finally modernized.
Okay, well, appreciate that. And so for those of us that don't know much about that, let's just jump in with the basic question. You know, if you could just help us understand what a life cycle assessment is.
Sure. I think it's better to start with basics, of course, right? Yeah. So for those who doesn't know about life cycle assessment, so we define life cycle assessment in a way that we call it is a holistic approach, or it's a process-based holistic approach, meaning that you try to, in a typical feed evaluation scenario, we try to assess the impact or effect of feed at an animal scales, right? So, but what happened with the manure management, what happened with the field where we produce feed? So what life cycle assessment does, it really captured the whole picture, trying to understand the impact of certain technologies or feed or production systems at a whole farm scale. So to give you an example, for example, to understand the definition, I wanted to make sure that I'm not defining in a more jargonic term rather than giving example. So let's say we wanted to evaluate certain dairy production systems, the impact of two different diets, right? So now if you feed that diet to those animals, to different group of animals, then what happened is you measure the impact of those diet on animal performances like production, milk components, and efficiency, manure yield, and those kind of things, right? But in terms of footprint or environmental impact, we try to measure the emission, right? So emission from the animals like cows, But what happened with the digestibility? If digestibility changes, that might affect your manure emissions. So we really need to understand if there is any trade-off between manure and animal emission. Now, that manure is going to stay there for a while, right? Depending on how long you store, your emission might differ, right? So then you apply manure to the crop field. Now you have emissions too from the soil, depending on what kind of crop, like how you apply, and those processes affect the emission, and manure composition, of course, affect, right? We need to capture that, right? Now, if you go back to the animals again, because you have to use some of the forages going back to the animals, right? So transportation and those involved, right? But also you purchase some of the feed from outside sometimes. A lot of dairy farms purchase like protein and other concentrated feed, right, from outside. So we try to incorporate the upstream the emission feed related emissions as well into the systems. So trying to understand the whole farm together is called life cycle assessment.
Okay, that makes sense. It sounds like you're saying we could do some things in the feed that might affect the manure and the value of that, and we might think we're saving money here, but we're costing ourselves money there, or we might be making more money there. But if we don't do an assessment, we're guessing.
Yeah, so let me expand a little bit just to, given you have mentioned about the cost, right, for example. So in a traditional life cycle assessment, although we call life cycle assessment, and I mentioned that it is a holistic approach, meaning that life cycle assessment currently, or in most cases, focuses on basically environmental impact like carbon footprint, eutrophication potential, like biodiversity, the particulate matter in the air, right? So those kind of things. But as you pointed, economics is very important from farmer standpoint, right? And producer standpoint. So the future of life cycle is going to be more towards more we call nowadays even comprehensive life cycle assessment, where you can now incorporate those two diet scenario. If I now evaluate, you can evaluate their profitability indicators and integrate into your life cycle assessment to see in terms of environment which diet is better now if we evaluate two diet. It could be any other technologies, not only diet, right? But what happened with the economics if you adopt one of those diet or technologies, right? Now, can you incorporate those economic aspect into the farm? Then you can really come up with the ultimate index that can help you to decide, oh, if I choose this diet, this is going to be my environmental performance, and this is going to be my economic performance. And now, if I integrate, this is going to be my net performance, right? So that's what it is.
I guess we've touched on this, but would you like to give us a little more detail on what the applications of LCA would be in agriculture?
Yeah, I think, yeah, sure. So as you said, we touched a little bit. So if I give a very short summary of LCA, actually it started a long time ago in 70s. Like it's a concept that is typically used in the chemical engineering, right? However, what happened is that in 90s or later on in 2000, the application of LCA has become very dominant in agriculture, mainly in animal agriculture, because animal agriculture produces a lot of greenhouse gases. When I say a lot, meaning that there's a lot of communication gaps here too, right? I mean, substantial, I would say. So then most of the application is trying to understand what are the environmental impact of certain production system. Mainly, most of the LCA studies in the agriculture focuses on ruminants, because ruminant produces a lot of enteric methane, and that contribute quite a bit to the methane emissions. If you look into whole greenhouse gas emission in the US, agriculture doesn't contribute a lot, like 10%. But if you think about only methane, it's quite a bit. 25 to 30% emission comes from animal agriculture. That's quite a bit. We cannot deny. We have to rather focus and improve. So life cycle assessment basically try to understand what is the footprint of this production system versus other production systems? If you go to like west part of the country versus east part of the country, or Midwest, right? For example, what are the production system impact on footprint? Or you can talk about what are the impact of if you go with the corn-based dairy versus alfalfa-based dairy, right? So you can assess that. You can also assess various technologies, like if I add a feed additive in a farm diet, what are the impact on environmental performance, right? We can also think about if I use certain technologies like anaerobic digester in a farm, what are the reduction possibilities on net carbon emissions? So those are kind of things that we can do using life cycle assessment, meaning that we can really assess the environmental performance of a certain production systems or technologies or scenarios. Then that way we can understand which system is doing better and really take the advantages of what are the best practices are those systems are doing that we can adopt to other systems that are not performing based on our expectation, right? So that way we can use those information in a useful manner. Now, if I think about future, like I don't know in near future or not, but it's coming probably today or tomorrow, is that a lot of product are going to be, even nowadays, if you go to like grocery store, even different spaces, you will see that carbon footprint. When you even go to book a flight, you sometimes see carbon footprint of this flight versus that flight. Based on that, you can decide which one is better. Now, the lot of branding for product and import export is going to be affected by those branding. If you have a country where your production system is more efficient, both environmentally and economically, you are going to be more competitive compared to other systems that are not performing well, right? So those are the broad and big picture applications. But in focused way, if we think about it, we can assess any technologies or any scenarios with the life cycle assessment.
Yeah, I would add too. I've been in agriculture a long time, and I think I agree with we're 10% of the carbon footprint problem, but I feel like we're about 70% of the discussion about it. And I think the more we know about it, the better informed we are. Then we'll do a little bit better in the debate than the people who are just kind of making stuff up. So I think I see that application as part of our stewardship that could help us in the public forum.
Truly, yeah.
A good deal.
I totally agree. Yeah. And yeah, of course we cannot just deny, but rather to know better what are the true impact and how can we better communicate with the community and our, at the country level, right? So people know the true impact of food system and the true contribution of food system in a good way, right? So that way we communicate our science better and then system better, and that would help produce.
It's good messaging.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on then to our next question, why then should we consider to evaluate our feed and our feed additives using LCA?
Sure. I think what I wanted to give the message so far is that LCA can really capture the trade-off between system components, right? So to answer your question, why should we think about evaluating feed and feed additive using LCA? Because let me give you an example. Given there are not many LCA studies on feed, and nowadays there are, but I'm going to give some example from my PhD study. So this is not too old, right? So during my PhD, I took a leadership with my advisor, of course, on a big project where we conducted a series of studies, right? Our goal was to understand the impact of particular feed systems or the feed production systems on dairy footprint. What we did is in Wisconsin systems, there was a huge transition from 90s to now, from more alfalfa-based dairy system to more corn-based system, right, which we all know. So we wanted to evaluate what are the impact of those transitions on environmental performances. So what we did, we evaluated a low forest diet versus high forest, mainly to understand, given the way we are producing animals now, we add a lot of concentrated ingredients in the diet, meaning that less forest is in the diet, right? So we wanted to understand under low forest condition and high forest condition how alfalfa based system versus corn based system effect. We also wanted to understand those diet in Holstein and Jersey scenarios. Jersey is and Holstein are two different breed of cows. Now, the key message here is that what we understood is that when we evaluated those diet on animal performances like milk yield, efficiency, digestibility, and enteric methane emission, meaning that emission from the animals, we did not see much differences. In some cases, like Holstein was better. In some cases, Jersey was better efficiency-wise. In some cases, high forest was better. But in terms of methane emission, they're same. Now, when we collected thousands of pounds of manure from the same study and stored it and measured the emission over a couple of months to understand what happened, given the diet is changed abruptly, right? So to understand their impact on emission, what we saw is the manure emission was quite a bit of different between low and high forest diet, meaning that there's trade-off. So if you look into at the animal scale, there's no difference. But if you go to the manure emission, there's difference. So the way we design our diet, that low forest, we expect usually less emission. But in our case, in the manure system, it produces more emission because it contains a lot of undigestible fiber, and that was fermented in the manure storage condition. So that produces a lot of methane. Meaning that when you look into animal scales, you don't see that difference. But when you look into the manure scale, you see a huge difference, 50 to 70% difference in emission.
Wow, that's a lot.
Now, we applied the same manure to the field. I did that during my grad school with a lot of help from a lot of undergrad and other fellow lab mates, and then measured the emission. What happened is that then we collected emission, and finally, we wanted to understand what are other factors in the upstream. If you produce corn, you have to put a lot of nitrogen fertilizer in the field compared to if you produce alfalfa, you have to put less nitrogen fertilizer in the field. Of course, depending on manure and those kind of things, right? But at the same time, you also have to understand the other differences. Like if you produce corn per hectare, you can produce more biomass, where if you produce alfalfa, you produce less biomass, right? Now, if you take all of those factors into account and do a life cycle assessment to incorporate emission from animals, from feed, from manure, and from animal management, like electricity and those kind of things, right? And that's your life cycle assessment. What we found that at the whole farm scale, until the milk leaves the farm, the footprint, carbon footprint was not different between alfalfa and corn. But from the low and high forest diet, that 70% difference came down to 10% at the farm level, taking into account all the other differences, So meaning that when you evaluate at the animal scale, your answer is quite different than at manure scale, than at the farm scale. So life cycle assessment can be applied to understand really the trade-off in assessing the feed and feed additives. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, we did not analyze the economics of those different dietary scenarios. That would be need to incorporate to understand which scenario is economically more feasible. Right. So that would be another step. That's what in the recently I have been doing a USDA funded project in Midwest, like Iowa, South Dakota, and mainly Minnesota farms to understand the relationship of farm economics, carbon footprint, and farm sizes to see the whether there is trade-off or synergy among those factors to supplement my PhD studies. So that is the one of the key application. But now feed wise, I can give you another example. I know it's going to be long a little bit. So during my postdoc, I wanted to see two key feed that has been well studied in dairy field, dairy and ruminant field, are 3-nitroxypropanol, or 3-NOP we call, as well as nitrate, mainly to reduce methane emission, because we talk a lot about methane in ruminants. So at the animal level, most of the studies demonstrated that 3-NOP or 3-nitroxypropanol can reduce 30% methane. And nitrate can reduce roughly 20% methane depending on dose and other factors. Now, we wanted to understand what are the impact at the farm level if we try to understand those feed additives need to be produced in a plant, need to be transported, that also emit, right? So transported back to the farm where we produce milk, right? And those also involve the transportation related emission. That's quite a bit sometimes. Okay, so and those feed additive can also affect animal productivity or performance, like digestibility and those factors. So if you take those into account, what happened? Now, does that effect also vary across production system? So what we did, we collected data from 1,400 farms from across the United States, from all over the United States, like 37 states, major dairy state, and we divided into 5 different regions, like the Midwest, southern state, and then west part of the country, and then eastern part was divided into northeast and southeast. And then we wanted to understand what are the impact of 3-NOP or 3-nitroxypropanol and nitrate on carbon footprint. Now we know that at the animal scale they can reduce 30% and 20% respectively. When we did the life cycle assessment, we saw that there is no interaction between farm regionality and feed additives. But when we look into footprint, nitrate can only reduce 5% carbon footprint at the farm scale, and 3-NOP can reduce 10% footprint at the farm scale. That is your net reduction. Understanding all the trade-off or capturing all the trade-off. So I think the key message here is that the life cycle assessment can help us to understand that true capture the true trade-off and understand the net effect of any feed or technologies, even new feed, to see the environmental impact. And in future, probably more, we can also understand the economics of the farms.
I know we're talking science here, but man, for farmers today, the economics are huge. If we can make a little profit here or do the right thing and increase our profit and be better stewards, that's a home run there. We got to just stay focused on it. I know I keep talking about economics, but that's.
I think I truly agree with you, because I talk quite a bit with farmers, although I don't have extension appointment, but because of my project, I had to talk to a producer. And then for them, of course, it's not only for them, we also realize that economics is very important, key here, right? Even for the adoption of technologies and making real changes, we need to consider the economics for the feed additives or feed or whatever the scenario we try to understand better that can enhance the economics. Yeah.
So do you have anything currently exciting going on in the lab that you're wanting to get out there and
sure
do some testing on?
Yeah, so I have a couple of grad students, of course, in my lab, right? So and quite a bit of undergrad and mainly. So as I said, let me give you 2 examples what we have been doing. Given you mentioned economics twice, so I should emphasize that as well. So I study feed additives, right? This is not a life cycle assessment, but this is very relevant. So we have been trying to understand like 10, 20 feed additives. Mainly, most of the feed additive study in our field is focused on enteric methane reduction. Now, what we have been doing different is that our approach is quite different, is that we're trying to see, are there feed additives that can not only boost the productivity, but compensate the cost of feed additives by themselves. So we are trying to understand two feed additive, three feed additive, single feed additive combination under different diet scenarios to see what are the impact on productivity gain compared to the cost of inputs. So that we have found, based on our recent studies, we did in vitro study and in vivo animal study, we found some feed additive can really boost productivity. Now we are trying to understand, can they go along? So one of the feed additive, let's say, can improve economics. So one of them, we recently published some papers that shows that male kill can be increased by 2.5 kilo per cow basis if we incorporate certain feed additives. Now, there are other feed additives that can reduce methane emission. Now, can they mechanistically go along and reduce methane at the same time improving the enteric methane emissions or enhance the digestibility? So we also use some advanced techniques like artificial intelligence to try to guide us to determine which combination, which dose, which diet scenario would be better. And we found certain additives that has really good promise to improve both potential productivity. We call potential because we have not tested yet those in animal scale study, as well as reduce methane emission. So our goal is to optimize for multiple different things. See, so that is one of the things. So our next step is to understand those in animal study. Those are in vitro based studies. Now we are trying to understand animal based study too, whether those works or not, right? And do some economic analysis as well to see their impact. The second study that we have been doing, which is under review in Journal of Dairy Science, and that's where we have done some work in other countries where we have tried to understand the dual purpose dairy production system in South Asia, mainly in Bangladesh. Okay. So although that might not be relevant, the production system is quite different than in the United States, but the key message might be important. So what we are trying to do there is that we collected data from over 5-10 years and 5 years mainly in this case to understand the impact of improvement, like animal improvement as well as nutritional improvement on footprint reduction and economic outcomes. So what we found that in dual purpose dairy production systems, enhancement of dietary strategies can substantially reduce emission, but also can improve economic output, right? So those are the key projects that we have been doing. As I mentioned also, we are collecting data from Midwest, from 30 different farms to understand mainly our goal here to understand the farm economics and farm sizes along with the environmental footprint. Can we find a farm that are doing economically better at the same time their stewardship wise they're doing also better? So that's what we need to find, right? And if we see that, oftentimes in the past literature shows that there's trade-off, but there's also some studies that demonstrated that those are simulation study, but we wanted to do real farm scenario analysis to understand those trade-off or synergy. If we really get good synergy, then we can pick those farms and see what are the good strategies those farms are doing. We can really use those strategies and communicate to other producers to see whether those can be useful for others. So that's what we have been trying to do in recently. So
last question is, what's the future trend and direction that you see for LCA?
So I would say I mentioned a couple of places, and I totally agree with you too. So incorporating although LCA is a holistic approach, but it is not truly holistic because it only focuses on environment. But from producer standpoint, it is not important. So future LCA should really focus on how to incorporate the techno-economic analysis or the economic assessment and how to integrate that with the LCA. And the second thing is that ecosystem services. If you analyze different scenarios, like if you say, if you go back to that example of corn-based system versus alfalfa-based systems, we did not dig into what happened with the soil over long term, like 30 years, 40 years, because it's very difficult to capture those like trend, because the management suisse again, right? So if you can track long-term data and see what happened with the soil health as well as ecosystem services, meaning that biodiversity in the soil and those kind of things, and how can we incorporate those into the LCA? There are a lot of literature nowadays. They're trying to focus on, can we integrate economics and ecosystem services like biodiversity, like animal welfare into the LCA framework, so that we truly understand different scenarios or net effect of different scenarios, not only on environment, but also on economics, but also on animal welfare, but also on animal health impact on economic performance, those kind of things. The another important thing is that animal system is very complex because it's a biological system, of course. And there are a lot of pieces out there, right? And their dynamics is quite different and complex. To understand those complex, we oftentimes in the past centuries or so, we always focuses on linear relationship in most cases, because understanding the nonlinear relationship is really complex and difficult. But with the improvement in computing and artificial intelligence, and nowadays farmers are gathering a lot of data. Like they use a lot of technologies, a lot of sensors, like robots, and those gives a lot of data. Can we leverage those data to understand system better? And AI really can help, or artificial intelligence can help to understand those dynamics better, and that can be incorporated into life cycle assessment, because life cycle assessment is, at the end of the day, data driven approach. If your data quality is not good, what you incorporate, your output is not good. So it can really help in future to improve our quality of output by improving quality of inputs, and as well as improving measurement accuracy and prediction. So those are the key, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's time for our famous three.
Deep in the jungle, nature holds the secrets to healthier, happier chickens. Science is unlocking those secrets with Optient, the revolutionary lighting innovation for poultry farming. By mimicking nature, Optient gradient lighting creates a unique floor-level lighting gradient that improves feed conversion by up to 4 points, slashes energy use by 70%, and keeps flocks calm and stress-free. That means better animal welfare and a more efficient farm. Want to learn more? Optient gradient lighting is now available exclusively through your local Valco dealership, or email optient@val-co.com today.
Well, I've got a couple other questions I'd like to ask you. I'd like to stop for a minute and thank our audience for joining us here. And I hope you like what you see. And if you do, you can hit the like button. You can share this with some friends you think might want to get smarter. The other thing is you can subscribe to our channel, and you'll see more of this kind of thing coming in the future. But Dr. Uddin, if you'll entertain me for a little bit here, I'd like to ask you 3 questions that we try to ask all of our guests. And the first one being, in the industry, what's your go-to resource? The thing you count on the most or use the most as part of your work life?
So of course, so right now I focus quite a bit on research. So I do read a lot of journal articles, and I am in dairy science field, and Journal of Dairy Science is considered as one of the best for us, because it's society journal, and so I do a lot of those. For the animal science people, like for farmers and other people like Dairy Horsemen, I sometimes read their magazine articles. I sometimes read some books too, like, of course, if we talk about professional, like nutrient requirement kind of things. So those are for the researcher are going to be very useful. For the producer, like Dairy Horseman might be the good way to understand the big picture ideas and what is going on.
Good. And so same question for outside of your area of expertise, just to, maybe you don't get outside your expertise, but do you have any personal, books or resources that you use for yourself?
I used to do a lot, but nowadays I do listen sometimes podcast, and some of them are very useful. For example, some of the academics and authors that I can never listen to them nowadays, I have the opportunity to listen and their views and their ideas, right? So that sometimes I think like very useful. But I also read sometimes for the non-academic books. I read online book sometimes, but I don't get a lot of time with two kids and nowadays. So, but I used to read books in the past. So
that's why it's a good question to ask. People who don't have a lot of time to do it usually have some good ideas where you need to go to get stuff, right? So
one thing I just wanted to add that sometimes I try to get some specific books to my mentee to see. To understand. For example, a couple of years ago, I thought for some of my mentors, they need specific ideas. So I wanted to share some specific books to them. One of them was Grit. So, and one of them was like how to help yourself in different setting, So,
yeah.
So those kind of things, I think I find it very useful.
Yeah, those are helpful. So my last question is, in your opinion, in your field, our field, agriculture, what sets successful people apart from those that are not so successful?
That's a very difficult question, though, for me. But yeah, let me give it a try. What I see in successful people, in my view, right? So, so I wanted to see them, right? So what do they do that makes them successful, right? So I think they focus on their stuff, I believe, and they have a certain strength in certain area, and they focus on that. And when I see success, it's like it's not only academic success like publication, but I see their impact, how much impact you can have in the industry that might be useful. I know one of my mentor is very known in the field, and what I see to him, and then I look back my conversation with him and try to understand what he does. Like one of them is like he's a like quick responder, for example. Like you can take action quickly, right? So or he's also he understands the future direction. So that one, because sometimes I see like the new way of thinking is coming out of his lab, for example. So other people are trying to go behind, but he is well ahead of others. So that's important. You have to think differently, and you have to go ahead of the game by thinking differently. Probably that might make you successful. But at the end of the day, like I think for me is what impact someone can have is important. Right. So
that's great. Yeah, that's good stuff. So, well, listen, Dr. Uddin, I really appreciate you joining us here. Thank you very much. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. For those of you that are viewing, we're going to sign off now. I'd just like to say thank you for joining, and may God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.